everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of the Kitabi Karwan Podcast. In today's episode, we have with us Miss Nandita Das. She's very well known for her brilliant directorial movies, Firaaq and Manto. At the same time, she's also known for being a multi talented actress, writer, theatre personality, and has donned many other hats. Without any further ado, let's begin. Hi Nandita, welcome to Kitabi Karwan, and
And
this is really happy to have you here. I think it's let's just address the elephant in the room. It's going to be a very any conversation which revolves around books and you has to start from Manto. Has to have it has to be there. I'm just
that's probably one author I've read the most also. So,
yeah. In fact, I haven't read your book Manto and I, but I heard snippets of your
yeah.
interview at the book launch at JLF, right? And it just
Okay.
spoke volumes about how you spent like 6 years just
Mhm.
reading Manto's work, and that's quite.
Yeah, it was quite intense.
I'm pretty sure. So again, I'm not too sure if you've ever spoken about this before, but what like did you ever stumble across Manto, or was it something you've read earlier in your life? What just drove you towards this one? I mean, there are a couple of other authors from that period also
Yeah,
who are just as remarkable, if
sure,
not
and
more.
very good ones.
Right, right.
Mm,
Chuktai, for example, like right there when you
absolutely.
talk about Manto. So, what was it about
Yeah.
Manto that attracted you to his literature, and B, towards his story, like his story as an author?
So to answer your earlier question, that I first, in fact, read Manto when I was in college.
Mm-hmm.
I studied in Delhi, and
Right,
I went to see a play, a small play on Toba Takesing, one of his best-known
right,
stories. And
right,
it was actually a pretty bad play. And I came out thinking, wow, the story is really powerful, even though it wasn't
right,
performed so well.
right.
And it was in a place called Sri Ram Center, and there was a little bookshop
Mm-hmm.
there, and it had all the 5 volumes of Manto's collection, and that too in Devanagari. So original Manto's writings,
Right,
but
yeah.
in the Hindi script Devanagari. And
Mm-hmm.
I picked that up, and it's still with me actually in my bookshelf. And I started reading. I only read some of the stories, and because it was in Hindi, and all of us are educated in English now, thanks to the
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
colonization.
Right,
You have to make an extra effort to read Hindi
right,
later in life. But I went to a school which actually put a lot of attention on Hindi. My Hindi was pretty good, but I still
right,
only read about 10 stories, maybe 10 or 12 stories, and then it
right,
kind of got left out, and
mm-hmm.
I kind of picked it. I did want to, when I started acting, I thought it would be wonderful to do short stories into short
Right,
films, which never happened. And then it was in 2012, which was Manto's centenary, that lots was being written about him, and his
mm-hmm.
stories were being translated. I mean, I started reading the translations,
Right,
and just reading about him, I think intrigued me more. And I picked up those books and I started reading his essays. And I
right,
was just struck by the person he was. Of course, the stories are so powerful, undoubtedly, but that's his imagination. You think
right,
you don't really know the person behind the stories.
right,
And the essays really reflect who he was, because it's a first person account and of various experiences he's had, his take on bumming cigarettes and
right,
why people drink, and about can graves be progressive, his satirical pieces that was
right,
just fascinating. He's written letters to Uncle Sam, which were
mm-hmm.
very prophetic. If you read them even today, you understand how America is trying to dominate the world, and he
Right,
kind of saw it even 70 years ago.
mm-hmm.
So I think it was all of that that kind of just intrigued me, and there was something very free spirited, brutally honest, and uncomfortably sort
Right,
of truthful about him. And in many ways, my father is like that. So I kind of started feeling like I know this man, because I grew up with a very Manto-esque maverick who is often misunderstood, and is difficult to deal with.
right,
And but having grown up also admiring someone like that and living with someone like
mm-hmm.
that, I think I felt like I would understand. I mean, I began to kind of understand Manto, and it
Right,
was just a very instinctive decision. It wasn't because he was a man, and I should have done this much of Thai, or some people say, oh, why is
right.
he's a Pakistani writer, even though he spent
Oh,
three-fourths of his
yeah,
life in India. We
right,
try to label people. He's
right,
just a great author. We don't say
right,
William Shakespeare is a British playwright. We just say
Yeah,
he's a great playwright.
great playwright.
So I was just drawn to him very instinctively, and
Mhm.
the more I read, the more sort of deeper I went into knowing him and
Mhm.
his stories and his writings, and I realized they were inseparable. And
Right.
that's why even in the film, even though the film is about Manto, I chose
Mhm.
to intersperse his stories because
Yeah.
I felt the audience needs to see them to understand him, and to understand him, you need to see his work. So
Yeah.
that's how, in
That's.
fact, even the structure of the film, that's something that came to me right from the
Mhm.
beginning.
Right. No, it's fascinating when you like a couple of things that you mentioned, right? I'll just address the first thing right away that when we label authors, right? And it's
Right.
something very interesting I saw on Twitter a couple of days back, and I retweeted it with my comment. Someone from Pakistan had tweeted, in Pakistan, when we want to share food, we don't say, "Can I please have some?" We go akele akele, and that's something that I shared with my friends on Twitter, and it just resonated with them. And that's one of those million things how it's
Yeah.
actually, it really doesn't matter whether you're growing up in India or Pakistan. Like the cultural bonds are
Absolutely,
such
yeah.
have
I
such
mean, we had the
strength.
same shared history just 70 years
Exactly.
ago, right? I mean,
Right.
we still invoke things that have happened 2000 years ago, 5,000, we claim it
Exactly.
as ours. And, this is the
Right.
Indian ethos, the Indian
Exactly.
culture,
Right.
the Indian architecture,
Exactly.
etc.
Exactly.
So, in some
Right.
ways, yeah, and I've been there a few times, so yeah, quite
Right.
a few times, in fact. So, that's
Right.
a whole topic, and it gets me a lot of trolls. But, the reality is that it
Yes.
would be a huge disservice to divide Manto in terms of nationality for sure.
I absolutely agree. But the other
He
thing that
belongs to both countries.
yeah, like for just love for Bombay, like we'll get to that later about
Exactly.
things, but it's very, it is something I know you can't separate him from India or Pakistan for that matter.
Right.
But the
Yeah,
other,
for Bombay, I mean, like you rightly said, he
right,
associated most with Bombay. I mean, his Bombay story collection, the reason it is like a separate collection is because he really felt that Bombay was the city that embraced him, that gave him
right,
dignity, that kind of acknowledged his contribution. Also, the film industry, he wrote
mm,
scripts, he acted,
mm.
so Bombay gave him a life that he kind of longed for. So,
So something that I wanted to pick up was you spoke about how you read his work for the first time in in Devanagari, like Urdu written in Devanagari, and later
right.
on when you start working on making of the film, you read his work as a translated work in English, right? So, and that's something I personally have faced. Like as you mentioned, post colonization, we've just India has emerged as this middle class culture that's come about, where you just have these bunch of so many people who can read English, right? This emerging class of people
Right.
who are reading in English and interacting in English. Like I'm conducting this interview in English,
It's such
but
a big divide, and also it's such a
right,
big divide in the country. I mean, that's the reality.
right. Uh, so what I wanted to actually ask you about was, do you um, do you think a translation can ever capture what a author originally writes in another language? So my first reading of Manto was a collection of short stories translated by Atish Tasi, and
Mm.
he wrote a very moving note about
Those are
how
still better translations, actually. I find them
uh,
much better than,
right,
no offense meant, but some of the other ones,
right.
the original ones, actually. Yeah.
That's actually one of the reasons why I ended up picking it up, because it just felt like I'd heard that they were one of the better translated stories. But
Yeah.
something that really moved me was his preface, where he spoke about how difficult it is to actually translate something,
Mm.
uh, a powerful language like Urdu into a very limited
Yeah.
language like English.
So, yeah, the translation. So, I mean, I have read so many works in translation. I'm sure so have you, right? I mean,
Right.
I'm not a purist. While I
Hmm.
do think that you do lose something, because language is not just the words, with it comes the whole ethos, the culture,
Hmm.
um, every choice of word the writer has sort of,
Right.
it's a choice that writer has made. I mean, someone like Manto is difficult to put in that category because he never edited his writing. He never
Hmm.
cut a single word, so he just wrote it.
Right.
So there
Right.
are some stories, in fact, written at the fag end of his life when he had almost become an alcoholic. but
Mhm.
and there are repetitions, and he would go off to some other subplot, but he would always
Right.
come back saying, I know I've digressed, but for a
Mhm.
good reason.
Right.
So he was still very agile. But someone like him didn't even edit, but most writers would edit. I mean, every time
Mhm.
my first book, Manto and I
Mhm.
never written so many pages, like
Right.
so many words. 37,000 words is a lot for me, for someone I did 9 years of column writing for the week,
Right.
but those were
Right.
700 words at one go. So I myself didn't read it. I read it like once and one and a half times again. But every time I would read it, I wanted to change
Right.
everything
Change.
because it sounded
Right.
horrible. So edit. So you choose every word. So I'm sure in translation you lose. Although there are people who have done such amazing translation that
Mhm.
it's not a transliteration. You
Right.
actually use the language which you are translating in the
Right.
best possible way. If you're doing
Right.
from Urdu to English, you're not trying to only replicate the idioms or the phrases if Urdu, but
Right.
trying to find the right one that would kind of work in English and
Right.
make sense and have that lyricism or whatever is
Mhm.
needed in English. So, and I mean, today we are reading. I've read all of Marquez in English. I mean,
Right.
imagine not being able to read Marquez just because I can't read Spanish. But I
Mhm.
think whether it's the great Russian writers or German or Spanish or French or even in our own country, great short stories and literature written in Malayalam or Bengali or a lot of the work that we have
Right.
read over the years has been in translation. So I have to say I'm very grateful that there are translations. Of course, we need to get better translators, and I think people are now more and more realizing that translation is just as important and not to be seen as a secondary thing. Now in literature
Right.
awards, there are awards for translation and for good reasons.
Right.
So while Manto initially wasn't that well translated,
Mhm.
because I think they were, from the family. It was much earlier on. There were old translations. There
Mhm.
wasn't that kind of interest, so nobody knew really translated. There were very
Right.
few other translated books of Manto. It's after 2012 that I think the interest grew in Pakistan
Right.
as well. He was given the highest civilian award,
Right.
Nishani-e-Imtiaz. Till
Mhm.
then they were kind of iffy about their
No.
relationship with
Friends
Manto
with
because
them.
he
Right.
was being too controversial.
Right.
And in India, of course, the theatre groups and people in literature always admired Manto, but he was still fully embraced, I think, after 2012. And I think there was a film called Manto in Pakistan as well in
Yeah.
2015.
15. Yeah.
And I think that helped people understand, I mean, know Manto and embrace him more there. And I
Mhm.
want to believe that my film also has helped in, sort of at least taking Manto to a wider, as films do,
Yeah.
taking
Mhm.
Manto to a wider audience. And I know that a lot of the publishing houses are very happy because their books on Manto are selling more now.
No,
So
of course,
yeah,
you're
so
absolutely
hopefully there are
right
more
there.
translations also coming out.
Mhm. No, you're absolutely
Thank
right
you.
there
Sorry.
because I've had this. No, had this experience on a personal basis where I know people who absolutely don't read, but have come to me after
Right.
catching Manto either in the theaters or on Netflix and just being like, "Oh, wait, you know what you
Right.
have?
More
Can I
people have
borrow
watched
a
it on
copy?"
Netflix.
Yeah, and where can I pick? But it's one of those things which has reached out to people generally. When you present a movie about an author, it's reached out to people who don't read, and that I
Hmm.
think is the biggest compliment I guess
Yeah,
can
and
go
their
out for your book.
curiosity then increases, and it's kind of
Right,
serves both, right? Like people who have
right,
read him wanted to see the film. Those who've seen the
right,
film didn't know of in Manto. They started reading Manto, and
right.
uh, and now there are more translations actually coming out very soon. I don't know, now with this lockdown, everything has come to a standstill, but hopefully after that there is a whole anthology that's coming out of Manto's writings in English. So I'm sure it'll reach out to more people. And also, Manto has been translated in many different languages. When I went to Japan, I met Urdu professors, and they showed me
Mhm.
some Manto translations in Japanese. There are
Wow.
these lovely little books that are individual stories in French that I saw, which were beautiful. In fact, I have a Thanda Gosht ka chota sa, like a literally a
Tran-
small
Small
book,
translated.
beautifully made, yeah, of
Yeah,
Manto stories. So it is slowly but surely kind of spreading. Good literature
right,
will survive the test of time. I mean, that's how we know it's
right,
good literature, right? Because I'm sure
right.
there's lot of rubbish that has come in every era, but the
Mhm.
good authors, the good films, good art, good music will always stand the test of time.
That's actually very true. Uh, just moving away from Manto and coming back to you. So, something that I've always admired about your work is that it's generally been spread across genres. That you've been a director, you've been an actor, you've written stuff, you've given TEDx talks, and so something that I've always believed, right, that which is not, doesn't apply only to authors writing books, but to the wider medium of art, wherein people create things that they end up, putting their souls into what they're actually creating, whether it's a film, whether it's script, whether it's I don't know a painting,
Sure,
right? And it's an expression of all their lived experiences altogether. Uh,
absolutely.
Right. So I'm actually very interested in your what built this shared experience of yours, right? Like how did if I can very in a very cliched manner put it, how did Nandita Das become Nandita Das? What were these other what was the art that influenced your art?
No, it's true that we are informed and influenced by our life experiences, and
Right.
that's a journey. It's not that you can really just say, okay, now this is it.
Hmm.
The more
Yeah,
experiences, the more you actually
of course.
expose yourself to experiences, the more holistic, the more confusing your life is, because
Hmm.
then you realize it's not any one thing.
Right.
It becomes more complex, but in an interesting way, because it's also a great way to kind of get over your own prejudices, your own blocks, your
Absolutely.
judgments, because you're constantly kind of being thrown into different situations where whatever you thought was the thing is
Right.
getting challenged, and there's something
Right.
new that's coming out. Of course, as a child, I had, in terms of the exposure to art, I had a big advantage. My father is a painter, my mother is a writer, so I was exposed to a lot of the arts. I mean, going to dance performances, music
Hmm.
concerts, exhibitions, through my
Right.
mother, going to book fairs and book launches. And that time, I don't know, there was many launches, but there were a lot of book
Book
conversations,
patience. Right.
and yeah, sort of readings, and also just wide range of artists who came to our house, which was
Right.
just a very normal thing. So a great photographer or a great architect or a musician
Right.
or a dancer, that's the world we lived in. In fact, cinema was never a form of entertainment. My
Right.
parents were not film watchers, so they never took me to any films. The only film I remember from my probably the first 18 years was Hathi Mere Saathi, which with some friends I remember we'd gone. And when I would come to Bombay, because my mother is Gujarati from Mumbai, this city, and my
Mhm.
father is from a small town called Baripada in Odisha. So every time we would come to Bombay, my grandparents would have television. We in Delhi didn't even have television for 8 years. My parents didn't watch TV.
Wow.
So, and now
Wow.
I'm coming a real full circle because I don't have a TV for last 4 years. And it's such freedom and so wonderful not to have that, as we call it, the idiot box. And when you don't have it, you don't miss it. And I have a 9-year-old son, so I don't have to tell him not to watch because it just doesn't exist.
Mhm.
So cinema was never really that form of entertainment. But when I later came into films completely by accident with
Mhm.
Fire, my first film, which I acted in,
Nice.
I think all these lived experiences, whether it was about the aesthetics that I had grown up with, so
Mhm.
how you compose a shot, or what kind of art
Right.
direction, for instance, you want to keep, what kind of music, just hearing sound. I mean, film is a composite art. So
Right.
all the various art forms that you've kind of subconsciously been exposed to, I'm sure comes handy. And then
Right.
just growing up with stories and books and literature, I'm sure that
Mhm.
informed and influenced my own thinking and writing. and
Right.
and then I did street theater with Safdar Hashmi for 4 years. I'm sure that had a certain kind of
Right.
experience. I did my master's in social work, you know
Mhm.
so that, I'm sure, the fact I was exposed to so many different realities, uh, beyond my reality, because all of us live also in silos. So
Right.
that informed me, I'm sure, in different ways. I taught in Rishi Valley for 4 months, which was
Mhm.
wonderful. That must have influenced me. So over the years, I think just not having an ambition, not having a profession, just kind of in some sense spreading yourself thin, which sometimes I thought was not a good thing because everyone would tell me that. And I would sometimes think that, oh, am I, what am I supposed to be? Like, am I supposed to be something? Am I an actor? But I don't do that much acting. Am I a director? I've barely done films that I've directed. How do you define yourself? Because
Right.
everyone wants like a nice one liner. I am a this. And I still don't have that. I still shudder when people say, so how should we describe you? And sometimes they call me an activist, sometimes social advocate, sometimes writer, sometimes filmmaker, sometimes actor. And I'm a little bit of all of that. And I just feel that everything that life has exposed me to, I'm grateful for that. Even the films that nobody gets to see, 'cause I've done films in 10 different languages, and people say, why did you do those films? I mean, no one's even seen it. And I'm like, no, people in Kerala have seen the Malayalam films, and they are
Right.
as important an audience as those who have seen my Bengali
Right.
films in Bengal, or a Marathi film in, Maharashtra, etc. But those experiences of going to those places that I probably would have never gone to,
Right.
shooting in Amravati, or shooting in a Taki Jilla in Bengal, or shooting in Idiki in Kerala, or whatever. I mean, those places I
Right.
don't think I would have normally gone. And those experiences are also just as precious. So I, in fact, tell young people a lot that just don't ask yourself, if I do this, what will I get out of it? Or this I have to do for what? See life more as a journey instead
Right.
of constantly having to reach any particular goal. And the goal will shift, will emerge. It, it,
Right.
it really doesn't matter.
Right. Like I think that's a great point that you've made. I think, and especially like to people like me who are like in our mid 20s, I guess, is that embracing growth in terms of having shifting goalposts and realizing who you are and as a person, where you fit in this world with 7 billion other people, and
Right.
it's a very, I guess, passive pressure, I suppose. It's not something that just constantly is on your head, but just somewhere at the back of your mind. And doing something like this is just living the way you've lived is, I think, one of the better
Yeah,
ways
I mean,
we've
that's the
heard
only
of.
way I know how to live.
Given that, Kitabi Karwan's a book, uh, book blog, I suppose. So something that I have to ask you is, um, I don't want to
A
ask
question
about
I
your
dread, I
favorite
can tell
book.
you that, Siddharth, because
Hmm.
I haven't been reading anything in the last several years. In fact,
That's a
almost 10 years, which is horrible.
oh
And
wow.
people think I'm just making it up because, I was an avid reader. And then
Hmm.
at some point when I was close to kind of releasing Firaaq, it started
Hmm.
decreasing because I was just doing too
Right.
many things. And I started shooting and all of that.
Hmm.
And then when I finished Firaaq, and I read a little bit in that final break that I had after the film was released. And then soon I became, I was pregnant, and soon I had a son. And then, of
Right.
course, again, I didn't have really the time because I also was the chairperson of the Children's Film Society, and I took my
Right.
honorary job rather too seriously. So I was already juggling when he was
Right.
literally a day old, my
Hmm.
son. So since then, my reading has really decreased over the years, and then Manto took over. So, every other work that I've done has kind of competed with my reading and my child. So, and
Hmm.
my child has taken precedence over that reading. I sometimes even save long form articles on my computer and my phone. I used to, well, now we don't fly, but for
Right.
flights or long drives that you have
Right.
to take, so that I can read a long form article without interruption.
Right.
So yeah, my reading has really decreased, but I do have lots of books. I still buy books in the hope that when I have the time, I'm going to read them. So I
I
have
think
like a big pile.
I think that's every bibliophile. Everyone has like these huge piles of books. But
I know, wish list of books.
like it was that was actually a part of my question as to what has caught your fancy in the reading world in the past few years. But the actual part of my question was, growing up, right? Like, because you've had such a, as you described it yourself, you've had such varied experiences. What were the books in your
Mm.
life that stood out for you? Not your favorite books. That's not what I'm getting at. Books that had a
Yeah.
major impact in shaping you, right? You might have hated the work, but it might just have left a lasting impression on you.
Um, I think if you hate something, you don't finish the book. So I don't remember
Mm,
hating. I mean, I didn't. A book that comes to my mind, which I might have put in that category had I read it, which is
mm,
Ayn Rand, like
yeah,
Fountainhead.
right,
A lot of my friends who read it then completely disliked it in the later years because they felt
right,
it shaped them a lot, but they now want to distance from
right,
it. But I and so many of my friends told me that they kind of told me the gist of it, and I was
mhm,
already I think a bit left leaning, so I decided not to read it. So maybe I would have put that book in that. But I think Marquez, definitely South American writers like Losa, Marquez
mhm, mhm,
influenced me a lot. Neruda, Pablo
mhm,
Neruda, and
right,
a lot of the Russian authors, I would say,
right,
from Gorky. I mean, I also read plays and stuff like that to,
mhm,
um, Kafka, to
mhm,
a whole lot of, I'm trying to remember. Um, Indian authors at that time we read less. It's in the later years that I think I
right,
started reading more.
mhm,
Because my mother was in National Book Trust, where
mhm,
it's basically a place where you work on Indian literature and translate it in different languages. So I
right,
don't remember reading a lot of short stories, of great
mhm,
writers from around the country to modern writers like maybe an O.V. Vijayan from Kerala, or
right,
from Bengal. Of course, there's no dearth of writing.
of course,
Then I started also reading non-fiction,
mhm,
even someone like Amartya Sen and Jean Drèze and people who are
mhm,
economists but came from such a social, compelling space that
right,
it wasn't sort of pure economics. And I think um, that also desire increased after I did my master's in social work. And
right,
you're young, you're idealistic, but you're also full of dilemmas about life. So yeah, over the years, I'm trying to think what other book that kind of totally stands out. Vikram Seth, I think he's one of our greatest
right,
Indian authors of all
right,
times.
right,
Like, I really, really like his writing. I just did some poetry reading of his, and just two or three for the World Book Day. Somebody had asked me to read out, so it was just
right,
nice revisiting.
mhm,
And yeah, but I'm very guilty of not reading anything new for a long time. But I hope to change that.
right. So, just I'm seeing it nearing the end of our time, so I'll just have a couple of more questions for you, right? Like just to sum up our conversation. Um,
Yeah.
so, I haven't read Manto and I yet, but do you think there's more books, or like maybe fiction books that you'll think you'll write in the future, because you've created work on screen, you've written scripts, but do you think you'll just go down that line of adding that author tag to those bunch of things that you've done in life?
I don't see myself as of now because I when
Right,
I write, I'm thinking either I write nonfiction, like I said, I used to write columns for almost
right,
9 years. I wrote so every month, but it was usually just responding to something happening around me, or somebody I've met, or something
right,
that's troubling and disturbing me, or one of those things. So I think it's nonfiction that I gravitate towards, or even Manto and I, in that sense, is a very stream of consciousness, first person account. It's of the whole journey, right from your question as to when was
mhm,
Manto introduced to you, to how did you think of making a film, to
right,
what happened, the trials and tribulations of releasing a film like that, and
right,
the problems that you face, and taking it to campuses. How do you get a crew? How do you raise funds?
mhm,
How do you find places that can recreate the times? How
right,
do you even recreate Bombay and Lahore of the 40s in today's modern day clutter? And
yeah,
that whole journey. So it was also cathartic for me,
mhm,
and it kind of dealt with many levels. It was not just the creative journey, it was not just the emotional journey, but it was all of it. It was creative, socio-political, emotional.
mhm,
What was it to make this film by being a mother? What is a female gaze? How do I deal
mhm,
with the tag of woman director? So many different things kind of found its way into it. So it's a very,
right,
very personal book, and it's a big, heavy book because
mhm,
it's also a picture book. because
Right.
it's got lots of photographs. I thought because it's a film is a visual medium, and if you
Right.
haven't seen the film, you kind of enjoy getting glimpses of the process of the film,
Right.
and the writings will pique your interest to watch it. And if you've seen the film, you'll be able to
Mhm.
relate to it and say, okay, yeah, that scene, I was wondering, how did they
Right.
even do it? Or, who was this actor who played Fez, for instance, or whatever.
Right.
So those kind of things, it's a storytelling, literally. But I don't see myself really writing a story, not as of now. I'll
Okay.
probably convert it into a film.
That's disappointing as a reader, really excited as a viewer. So, okay.
Well,
For my last question, it's actually not a question. It's just what advice would you give, or what would you say to a person, or like to millions of young people out there who are engaging in different art forms and are slightly, I don't know, being told, oh, you're always in books, or you always keep painting, you just waste too much time on dancing. Like, what would your message be to all these people out there who are, I know, who love their art but are just not really given the opportunity to chase
yeah.
it as much as
Well,
they
I mean,
want it?
it's easy to tell them. It's an easy advice that they already know. That follow
Hmm.
your heart. Do what really makes you happy, because finally, that's the feeling you would want to grow up with, right? I mean, we do
Right.
something for a certain thing. What is that thing in your mind? If it is happiness,
Right.
then you would be the happiest doing what you really love doing. And it is possible to even make your ends
Right.
meet if your needs aren't ostentatious, if you don't want too much,
Right.
if
Right.
that's not your goal, then it is definitely. But the trouble is not that. The trouble is when people don't know what they really want to do. Like, I remember
Right.
I used to give a lot of talks, I still do, with to young people. And many years ago, almost 15 years ago, I was in a college and I said something about follow your heart. And one girl got up and said, Ma'am, but I don't even know what my heart wants. I've never had the
Hmm.
opportunity to do things that are of interest, that I think I would be interested in. And I realized that my upbringing is a privilege I undermine, because just to be able to have the freedom to do whatever, to be able to ask questions, to not have to do a MBA or not have to be pushed into being a doctor, engineer, the usual stuff, and never to. I never was questioned as to why you're doing what you're doing. Is if you're truly doing it with a sense of meaning, purpose, joy, then that's
Hmm.
it. And I realized that our education system, our familial setup, does not encourage us to do different things. But expressing oneself through art is not an elite activity. It's a very primal thing. That's why the cavemen and women, painted in their caves. That's
Right.
why even a tribal woman, decorates her basket or weaves. They weave their saris with certain patterns. They could just do it
Right.
if it's just a matter of it being functional. So I think
Right.
that expression, to be able to express yourself through art, is a real gift that you can give to yourself. So
Right.
yeah, just expose yourself to different things, try out, don't fear failure. It's not to prove anything to anyone. uh,
Right.
just go with the flow. I mean, even the short film that I launched 2 days ago, it
Hmm.
was a very impulsive response to an article that I read about overburdening women. And then I was, of course, reading about how domestic violence has surged. And I just wanted to bring
Right.
these two threads together about women in homes. So I
Right.
literally just wrote it. I did a second draft. I shot it 3 mornings because of the light changes afternoon.
Right.
And, and I didn't know whether it would resonate, would it touch the right nerve, would it not? But I just put it out there, and I'm truly overwhelmed with the response. So I think sometimes not worrying about what's going to happen from it kind of
Right.
also frees you to do what your heart really tells you to do.
Mhm. Well, that's a very really heartwarming message to actually take to people. That's Thank you so much for doing this. That's a very
Thank you,
very sweet of you
Siddharth.
to do this. Thank you so much for appearing on our
Thank you.
podcast.
All the
Um,
best.
Thank you for listening to Kitabi Karwan. This was the final episode of our first season of the interview series. We'll be back very soon with the series, but in the meantime, we will keep coming up with interesting podcasts for you. If you've liked our work, Please don't forget to hit subscribe, follow, like, and comment on our podcast. Thank you.